the Naval Academy. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the first slide. Next one, please. All right, key concept that I've believed in all my life, okay? And that is we need to learn from the past, we need to learn from others, and then we need to take steps to prepare for the future. Learn from the past, because if you don't learn from the past, you may end up repeating the mistakes that many other people say. Learn from others, best practices, lessons learned, etc. And then you need a plan for what are you going to do to capitalize on opportunities, to mitigate risk. And I say that intentionally, capitalize on opportunities and mitigate risk. You can't maximize value and minimize risk. It's an oxymoron. Next, please. Next, all right. My latest book, I've written 4, including a national bestseller. My latest book I self-published. It's called America in 2040, Still a Superpower, ? And to give you the bottom line, the answer is yes, if, and no, unless. And there are 4 elements of being a global superpower. You have to have global economic power, global diplomatic influence, global military capabilities, and global cultural influence. The United States meets these criteria and has ever since World War II and arguably before. The Soviet Union never met these. Russia does not meet these because they're not a global economic power. They don't have global cultural influence, and obviously their military is not what people thought they were, as evidenced by but China is. And China, we have the largest economy on based on nominal dollars. China has the largest economy based upon purchasing power parity. China has more diplomatic missions than we do in the world. China does not have a global military capability, but they have a significant military capability. They're clearly number 2, and they're committed to having a global capability. They have significant cultural influence, and so let's go to the next slide, please.
And David, I just want to just jump in for 2 seconds and say one of the themes that we've been discussing for years now is this battle of Chinese mercantilism versus the United States and the other 4, the 3 other support structures that you're talking about. So,
okay, sounds great. Go. All right, let me give you the bottom line. The United States is a declining power based on our current policies and path. China is a rising power, but it faces some significant challenges. Arguably, one of the biggest is demographics. Their demographic challenge because of their past single-child policy. We have tough choices that we need to make if we want to assure our future superpower status. Conflict with China can and must be avoided. The number 1 indicator on the way up and the number 1 indicator on the way down is economic power. And if you don't put your finances in order, you will not maintain economic power. It helps you have significant diplomatic influence. It helps you fund your military, and it helps others people to want to emulate. So that's where we are. Next slide, please. The U.S. government has grown dramatically. In 1912, it was 2.5% of the economy. So total federal spending is 2.5% of the economy. Next slide. Before COVID, it was about 21%. This year, it's 25%. So let me state it differently. The federal government is 10 times bigger today than it was in 1912. 3 things happened in 1913 that fueled the size and growth of the federal government and undercut states' rights: the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and the direct election of senators rather than being appointed by state legislatures. Let's move on. I can answer questions on this stuff later if you want, but let's move through it. Next. So the government's grown dramatically. It's gone way beyond what the founders envisioned that the federal government would do, but it's also lost control of the budget. In 1912, 97% of spending was controlled. The only thing that wasn't controlled was interest. And the Federal Reserve hadn't been created yet, so we couldn't self-deal our own debt. We couldn't manipulate interest rates. We had to pay market rates. That's not the case now, and that's in danger of changing if we don't get our act together. In 2019, 71% of the budget was on autopilot, meaning it's not controlled. We've written a blank check. That's social insurance programs and a number of other things. And of the 29% that was controlled, about half of that is defense. And every express and enumerated responsibility and vision for the federal government by the nation's founders are in that 29%, and that's shrinking. All right, next, please. Next, okay. You know, you hear a lot. Yeah,
There's a delay. There's a delay on Zoom, just so you know.
No
so when you
problem.
say next,
Okay, no problem. You hear a lot about the debt subject to the debt ceiling, and we just resolved the debt ceiling situation. I'm happy to comment on that if people have questions. But at the end of the last fiscal year, which is September 30, 2022, the total debt subject to the debt ceiling was about 31 trillion. Now it's well over 32. But you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because if you look at the financial statements of the US government and you look at unfunded pensions and retiree health care for civilian and military, if you look at unfunded Social Security and Medicare obligations and a variety of other things, the real number as of the end of 2022 was 123 trillion, not 31 trillion. So, you know, like an iceberg, the Titanic wasn't sunk because of the ice that was above the water. It was sunk because of the ice that was below the water. Generally, 90%. Right.
Just to clarify, unfunded obligations.
Yeah.
Can you just repeat? Can you just repeat
unfunded
obligations?
Too, Marty. There are liabilities too. Civilian and military pensions and retiree healthcare are part of this, but the biggest numbers are Medicare and Security, and Medicare by far the biggest. Okay. And next slide, please.
Yep.
Well, let's translate these numbers. Okay. The 123 trillion is $1.5 million per federal income taxpayer. Over 40% of individuals pay zero income tax, and about 20% not only don't pay any income tax, they get a rebate because of the earned income tax credit, child care tax credit, or other refundable tax credits, if you will. So the bottom line is that we need more people paying something, and we're going to have a more progressive tax structure and an alternative tax structure going forward. Next, please. And, you know, here's the numbers for Social Security, Medicare. Social Security goes to zero in 2034. The combined program, if they don't do anything, everybody's benefits got to get cut across the board, 20%. So people that say, I'm not going to touch Social Security, my comment to them is that means you want to cut benefits across the board, 20% in 10 years. That's what your position is. If that's what your position is, then fine, but don't try to act like you're helping people. You're not. And then Medicare, you can see the numbers there, 2031 and an 11% cut or increase in taxes more likely there. Next, please. The problem is that we're spending well above average post-World War II. Revenues are about average or a little bit below average post-World War II, but spending is growing much faster than revenues. And so the gap grows, and the difference obviously results in additional debt. Next, please.
And Dave, just to clarify, revenues is actually taxes.
Well,
revenues is taxes.
Yeah, it's taxes. That's great.
Thank you.
An overwhelming percentage is revenues. I mean, it's taxes.
Yeah, it's taxes and licensing, whatever. Yeah.
It's overwhelmingly taxes. Okay.
Yep.
The fastest growing expense is interest. And what do you get for interest? Nothing. It's paying for past excess consumption and sends. The second fastest growing expense is healthcare programs. Social Security is a challenge, but it's not nearly as big a challenge as healthcare. Next, please. By the way, I was the first CEO of this foundation, so I use some of this.
Pete Peterson's great, fantastic, great guy.
Yeah, he was, and may God rest.
Yeah, real visionary.
Yeah, he was. Here's the real problem. I don't focus on deficits, which is the difference between revenue and expenses. I don't focus on debt. I focus on two things: debt to GDP and interest as a percentage of the budget. That's what matters. Up until World War II, we never had debt to GDP of more than 40%, which is very manageable because we were fiscally responsible. We were concerned with stewardship. In World War II, we went up over 100. And if you count debt that we owe to the Social Security and Medicare trust funds, we've already beaten the World War II record. We've already exceeded it. So the issue is not where we've been, not where we are, where we're headed. That's
Dave, David, the untold story about the number that you have here is that debt, U.S. debt, is considered to be part of GDP.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
So right, so deficit spending. Okay,
yeah. Okay, next, please. Here's the fastest growing expense: interest, for which we get nothing. Next, please. Now, what about GDP growth? All right. Now, this is just for the last 3 years. We obviously took a big hit because of COVID. What you see here for 2021 fourth quarter is a rebound from COVID when we started opening back up. We then had a recession. But what you're seeing is slow economic growth. And we're going to continue to have slow economic growth because of increasing debt burdens, because of demographics, and because of a variety of other factors. So, so we need to get our finances in order. We need to change our immigration policy if we really want to, among other things, if we really want to get growth up. But the number one problem is putting our finances in order. Next, please.
Dave, you're going to dive into immigration policy later.
I'll take a question on it, but it's not in the
okay.
slide. Okay. The Fed kept rates too low for too long, and it started acting too late. And you can see what's happened to the Fed rates. They did take a pass in June. We'll see what they do in July. Next slide. What we'll focus on is the Fed's balance sheet. We have been self-dealing in our own debt since the financial crisis back in 2008, and it accelerated dramatically with COVID. Basically, the Fed purchased almost all the new debt. So we didn't go to market to pay market interest rates. The Fed held down rates. The Fed bought it. That held down rates. But eventually, they've got to dispose of it. And when they do that, that's going to have the opposite effect, especially put our finances in order. Next, please.
Dave, are you going to talk about velocity of money later?
We can talk about it in Q&A. Go ahead.
Yep.
Inflation. We're down from the peak of 9.1% back last June. The latest number is 4%, which is obviously a significant decline, but it's double what the target rate is for the Fed. And you can see that a lot of the inflation was driven by food and energy up until the last several months. But now food and energy prices are actually coming down somewhat as compared to the past, and which is one of the primary reasons why the overall rate has gone down. Next, please. Unemployment's not a problem. It did tick up this last month. Labor participation is a problem. We have a low labor force participation as compared to historical averages, for lots of reasons, part of which people didn't come back after the pandemic, part of which is because government social welfare programs are too generous, among other things. But the real problem we have is we got a big mismatch between what do we need for the economy and what do we have. There's a big skills gap, big gap between the skills and knowledge that we need. And now everybody's talking about AI. I think the net effect of AI is going to be, we're going to lose more jobs than we're going to gain. We are going to gain jobs. We're going to lose more than we're going to gain. But there's a big difference between the skill level and what are you going to do with the people who lose their jobs. And that's part of the issue of we need to start reshoring and focusing on alternative shoring, especially as it relates to China. Next, please. Household debt's up. Now, this is non-government. This is, household debt. Next slide, please. Savings is down. That's kind of the opposite of what you want. Next, please. So what's the bottom line? The federal government's grown dramatically. It's promised too much. It's subsidized too many. It's lost control of the budget. It's got to restructure its finances in order to create a better future. Current fiscal and monetary policies are unsustainable. The Inflation Reduction Act, was misnamed. The Fiscal Responsibility Act that was recently passed, was a very modest step in the right direction. Failure to act will have severe adverse consequences for Americans. In my view, and this is shared by several former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the United States will never be conquered from the outside for three reasons. Number one, our military. Number two, our geographic location. And number three, the Second Amendment. But the truth is that, you know, our future is at risk, not just for the country, but also in particular for our grandchildren. Next, please.
1 second.
Sure, no problem.
Yep. Okay. No, that seems to be the wrong one. Okay, there you go.
All right. I testified before the House Budget Committee, and I've testified over 300 times, I think more than anybody else in the country. What do we need to do to get our act together? First, we got to stop the bleeding. They did some of this in the debt ceiling deal where they cut spending, you know, as compared to the prior year. Not as much as they should have, but they did cut spending. Secondly, you got to stabilize the patient. And again, focusing on debt to GDP. For after World War II, we grew GDP faster than the debt, and debt to GDP plummeted. Now we're growing the debt much faster than the economy, so it's the opposite. We got to reverse that. And in order to do that, we're going to need some type of statutory commission that engages the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, brings back recommendations, guaranteed up or down vote in Congress. That's what it's going to take. But in order to cure the disease, we're going to have to have a constitutional amendment, not a balanced budget amendment, even though 49 or 50 states have them. At the federal level, it doesn't make sense and it wouldn't get passed. But we need one that focuses on what we have, what's most important. That's debt to GDP. To limit how much debt we can take on as a percentage of GDP, absent limited, extraordinary, temporary circumstances and a supermajority vote of the Congress with a signature of the president. We got to tighten up. Statutory approaches, whether it's the debt ceiling, which has been a dismal failure, whether it's sequesters, whether it's Graham-Rudman, whatever, they have not worked. They have not stood the test of time. The only thing that can bind current and future Congresses is a constitutional amendment. And the way to get it, in my view, is a convention of states, and Article 5 allows for that. Next, please.
Convention of
1 second.
Sure.
Okay.
Convention of States.
In order to get a convention, under Article 5, there's two ways to get a constitutional amendment. 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate can pass something,
Got it.
send it to the states. 3/4 of the states have to ratify it for it to become part of the Constitution. The founders envisioned, and they were very far-sighted people, not like what we have today. Seriously, I mean, our biggest deficit is a leadership deficit, okay? But they were very far-sighted people. They envisioned that Washington could become so out of touch and out of control, or there could be certain issues where they had a fundamental conflict of interest, limits, like campaign finance, like controlling spending, all right? That the states should have the ability to assert their rights as under the Constitution. And if 2/3 of the states, or 34, ask for a convention of states to propose one or more amendments, and in this case, we're only talking about one, fiscal responsibility, then the Congress shall call the convention. The states try to agree on something. If they can, they then send it to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. And that's what I've been working on. And next slide, please. Believe it or not, in 1979, 39 states had active applications. It went up to 40 in 1983, and Congress never did anything. Even though we have an express and enumerated response, I and others are taking steps to try to hold Congress accountable and potentially go to the Supreme Court and demand that a convention of states solely focused on a fiscal responsibility amendment happen, because the vast majority of these applications were single subject. If you have a convention that's one state, one vote, majority of the states say that we only want to have a convention to talk about this issue, then they will control the scope of the convention. Then they have to agree on something, okay? And so these are the states. You can see that did it. And if you want to know more about it, website down below, let us vote for FRA.org. Okay, next, please. I'm on the board for that group. The second thing that's in the news lately is I'm one of the national co-founders of a group called No Labels. And by the way, I heard you mention the concept problem solver. No, the No Labels created the problem solvers in Congress. There's 62 members of the House, equally divided between Republicans and Democrats, that work together to get things done. They were instrumental with regard to the debt ceiling. They were instrumental with regard to the infrastructure bill. They were instrumental with regard to the CHIPS bill and the most recent veterans bill. They have the ability to have significant influence because the margins are so tight, between Democrats and Republicans. And one of the things you may not know is right now, 69% of Americans do not want Joe Biden to run for re-election, including majority Democrats. 62% of Americans do not want Donald Trump to run for re-election, including a majority of Republicans. And 74% of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. For the first time in history, 78% of Americans believe that the future for their grandkids will not be as good as they've had it. That's just downright un-American. And let me tell you, if we don't change course, they're right. It won't be. Okay. And so, given the unprecedented dissatisfaction among voters, and not only with regard to the direction of the country, but the opinions of the likely candidates, given, No Labels is developing an unprecedented approach where we're going to qualify for ballot access in all 50 states and DC. And if, and only if, in April of 2024, there's a pathway of victory in the Electoral College for a third option unity ticket focused on a specific results-oriented agenda, which will come out next month, if and only if we will identify candidates and we will offer the American people a third option. We're not interested in being a spoiler. We're not interested in tipping it one way or the other, but the American people don't want the options they're being given, and the parties are ignoring the will of the American people. And the conditions that we're talking about have never before existed in the history of this country. And Ross,
I just want to, Dave, I just want to be clear. You're not talking about something that's libertarian, are you?
No, but libertarians could join the cause. I mean, we're talking, the president and vice president wouldn't have the same political affiliations. They would be ostracized by their parties. There's no question. The parties don't want this. The people that are really adverse to it are the Democrats, because the Democrats think it'll throw it to Trump. They don't have any data to back them up, but I mean, everybody's entitled to opinion, but I personally like to have some data. We've done an unprecedented 26,500 person poll, statistically valid in every state. As of now, there's a pathway to victory. There may or may not be a pathway to victory in April of next year, which is when we'll make the decision. But by the way, a lot of things can happen. And Trump's got a lot of legal problems. Biden's got a lot of issues that may come out. So who knows what happens. Parties aren't listening to people. They're not providing us the kinds of choices that the people want. And somebody's got to stand up for the people of the party.
There's definitely a problem. I think one of the premises of business always, though, is who's the guy, right? Anyway, is there a next slide?
I think so. We're about done.
Because we have lots of questions.
All right, last. Remember, I talked about learning from history, learning from others, preparing for the future. Rome was the greatest superpower of its time. Rome fell for several reasons: fiscal irresponsibility, political incivility, moral decline, overextended military, and inability to control its borders. Do those sound familiar? You need to learn from others. And by the way, Switzerland is the model. They adopted a constitutional amendment with ratification by their citizens by over 80% that focuses on constraining spending federal spending as it relates to the growth of the economy, and focuses on debt to GDP. That's what we need to do. We need it sooner rather than later. Last thing, coming back to something that was mentioned before. China has a plan. I think I've covered this. China has a plan. A part of that plan is the Belt and Road Initiative. Their plan focuses on economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural factors, among other things. And again, those are the 4 factors to be a global superpower. A big part of it is the Belt and Road Initiative, which covers all 4 of those elements. We have no plan. No plan. If you ask the executive branch, what's our strategic plan for the country that focuses on these 4 elements, they'll tell you the budget. The budget's not a plan, and it's a 1-year document. Now, the Defense Department does plan a little bit further than that, okay? But the Defense Department is also going to face increasing pressures because of what I've showed you already. And so, bottom line, it's time to wake up. It's time to start making so we can make sure that our future is better than our past. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, well, any questions from the audience here? We've got everybody's hand is up, so, well, why don't you go first?
Yeah, David, I wonder if you could just jump in with your outlook for the dollar, because your theme is defending our competitive advantage, and now a number of non-aligned countries, China in particular, are promoting alternative currencies. And literally 3 weeks ago, we just had a near miss with the debt ceiling extension. So that clearly could be a game changer. We don't have that sweet spot we've had since World War II.
So a question yesterday was de-globalization and de-dollarization. Thoughts?
All right. Well, first, as I point out in my book, strategically, what's happening is there are several countries that are aligning against the U.S. economically, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally. Those countries are China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and I could give you a few more, but those are the ones that matter. Part of that is dealing with the issue of alternative currencies. Part of that is dealing with alternatives to SWIFT. They are very serious. We are abusing, in my view, our status as the world's largest reserve currency. And I do not think that we will lose reserve currency status, but I think we're going to lose market share over time. Now, what will that do? Well, that means the cost of borrowing will go up. The advantages of us with regard to trade will be lessened, and our ability to impose economic sanctions on bad actors will be significantly reduced. So, a very good friend of mine is Bill Owens, who was former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're on a couple of boards together. He's also former vice chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. He does work around the world, including in China. And this is something that he is really, really concerned about.
Hey, David, my name is Peter Thurlow. I was in the military. Now I work with DARPA. DARPA spoke yesterday, and I've done a lot of work. I'm a patent attorney, went to the Merchant Marine Academy, was in the Navy. So thank you for all your candor and the work you've done. Part of me feels like I need a shot of whiskey. After that,
I need two. I want to thank you for your service.
Yeah. So the thing I'm trying to work on with the government, because we're in this family office investor meeting, and the last couple of years I've had to track capital, is that if you look at DARPA yesterday when they spoke, and they spoke at earlier meetings with Marty, they have a $4.3 billion budget. And they give that money out, basically not asking anything in return. Obviously, they make an investment for jobs, for creating companies and so on. I've asked them to consider, no alternative is easy, right? But I've asked them to consider treating the country's IP as an asset. So just like a university, when a university licenses out its IP, it gets a certain percentage of equity in the company, 3 to 5 to 8%. If you look at the money, they were an early investor in Moderna. If they took 3% equity in Moderna, that reached a market cap of $80 billion, $100 billion, that's some return on investment. My speech to them is that the only approach to fixing all these dire fiscal situations that you mentioned can't be so-called tax the rich, especially We're here in New York and I live in New Jersey. So I think we need to use our assets more and get more revenue into the US government for the asset focus, not just taxing. Can you give me your perspectives on that?
First, I'm on the Defense Business Board, which focuses on economy, efficiency, effectiveness for the Defense Department. I have raised this issue before and I continue to stay on it. I totally agree with you that we ought to be getting some equity position or whatever. They say that they're thinking about that, but we need to act rather than just think about stuff. Bottom line is that we need to be spending more money on investments and a lot less on consumption. But when we spend money on investments, they need to be something that we expect, that we believe, although it may not turn out, will generate a positive return. Right now we have something called a unified budget, which means that investments are treated the same as consumption. And you'll have members of Congress saying, well, we're going to invest in this. What translated, they're going to spend money, but they have no idea whether or not it's going to generate a return. And in fact, in appropriate circumstances, including the one that you and I are talking about, we ought to be getting a piece of the action. There's no question about that. Some people get concerned about proxy voting. We're not talking about a big enough percentage that we're going to end up dictating what ends up happening from a corporate governance standpoint. And we can not, vote the proxies because we're talking about a fairly small percentage of the company, if you will. But yes, I agree with you. And by the way, here's the bottom line. We're going to have to adopt pro-growth policies, which involves more investments, regulatory reform, immigration reform, comprehensive tax reform, restructuring social insurance programs. We're going to have to do that. Most of the problems are going to get solved through reducing projected spending, including defense. Defense is a bloated bureaucracy. The so-called tail, which is the overhead of non-warfighting capability, has grown dramatically. The fighting force has actually shrunk. So the tail has grown dramatically. The fighting force has shrunk. And so we're going to have to rationalize the size and scope of the Defense Department to focus more on capabilities and less on bureaucracy. But we're going to have more revenues. There's no way you're going to solve this problem solely on the spending side. And the math doesn't work to grow your way out of this problem. And so we're going to have more revenues too, but in doing that, we need to be concerned about being competitive. We need to be concerned about equity. We need to be concerned about a variety of factors, but we're going to have more revenues.
Hey, Dave, I just want to make a comment. We have other questions here, but my perspective is that governance is eating up the United States. As you just pointed out, there's fewer military people, but far more people who are governing those military people. You go to the colleges in the United States, professors don't really make much money compared to what they made in the 1970s. And there's far fewer tenure track positions, but there's far more bureaucrats overhead on them as well. Right. Same thing in healthcare. Doctors are middle class these days, right? They pay so much, but there's incredible bureaucracy. So there's a governance issue that's involved with all this, where there's just so much bureaucracy, so many mandates, so much regulatory, and maybe that's something you guys can address at some time in the future. But one question I do want to raise is, can you
bureaucracy, Brack?
Yes, absolutely. So one question I do want to bring is, can you have the global reserve currency without running deficits?
They're not mutually exclusive, but the point is that if people lose confidence, if they lose confidence in our ability to put our finances in order, especially now that we have other countries that are actively trying to look for alternative approaches, that's not in our interest. We are not exempt from the laws of prudent finance. And
fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Dan Connolly has a question here. I recommend Dan as your nominee, by the way, for your party, but anyway, he's a very outspoken person. Dan?
Well, I might have missed it, but do you have a prognostication about what is going to happen in the presidential election? is there gonna be a third party? Who might lead it? And, is Biden gonna be impeached?
I don't want to spend too much time on that, but 30
Right.
seconds on political prognostications.
Yeah, we should stay away from politics.
Yeah, just a 30
Very-
second prognostication.
The Democratic Party is doing everything that they can to pave the way for Biden. So the only way that Biden's not going to be the nominee is if something happens to his health, or if something comes out as a result of these activities with his son's businesses that somehow taint him. I mean, that's the only way he's not going to be the nominee. With regard to Trump, we'll see what happens with all his cases. The litigation has helped him with the face of the party, but it's hurt him with regard to the general electorate. And
He'll be president in jail. Yeah.
sorry.
That's a prognostication. Yep. We're taking some.
They are both.
I know, I'm sorry. I had to do it.
Yeah. Anyway, we have another question.
Yeah, David, thank you for the discussion. Of the four factors, if you look at culture, how would you benchmark the US and China, and where do you think they're going on the cultural front?
Well, the Chinese are very proud people, okay, and but their system is very different than ours. They're an autocratic system. The Communist Party controls everything. They don't have privacy. They don't have as much ability for entrepreneurial spirit and things of that nature. We have a battle going on over ideology. All right, it's not just about economics. It's not just about the military issue. Okay, it's about how do you govern and how do you treat your people, right? And by the way, let me just mention Taiwan for a second. We're really in a conundrum on Taiwan. We do not recognize Taiwan as an independent nation, and none of our major allies do too. We have publicly stated that we support the one China policy. We don't have a treaty with China, okay? A defense treaty with China. We want them to be able to have one country, two systems, but the problem is that they could argue that we're messing in their domestic politics. And the real question is that if they decide that they want to intervene in Taiwan militarily, there's a difference between what we can do, what we should do, what we will do. And I personally think that this situation is going to come to a head within the next several years, one way or the other. And Taiwan's in strategic importance because its geographic location and because it's the #1 manufacturer of high-end semiconductors. Okay, and so it's strategically important. But we talk out of both sides of our mouth with regard to Taiwan. And if Xi's going to do anything, in my view, he'll do it within the next 5 years because demographics start working against him after that. In addition to that, if he's going to do something, in my view, what he would think about doing first is a blockade.
Yeah. So Dave, I don't know if you read any George Friedman, Stratfor, et cetera, but his argument is the United States has no natural enemies because we have friendly countries on our borders, whereas China is kind of surrounded most of the other countries in Asia and Europe, right? So I mean,
but China has not historically been a country that tried to,
an aggressor.
Yeah, they've not been an aggressor in the past. Okay, they have not. Okay, they want to displace the United States as the leading power in the world. Okay, I mean, that's what they want. And I don't. They're not coming here. They're not coming here. They're not going to militarily try to go other places in the world. They understand that #1 is economics.
Yeah, I mean, they're taking a mercantile approach and it's working. And in the old days, the United States had a great mercantile approach as well, but we fouled it with all of our terrible international monetary groups, right? That are ineffective in helping countries grow, right? We had another question.
Yes, actually two. One, as an individual, aside from voting, what else can we do?
Yeah, how can we help you? What can we do to make things better?
Check out the two organizations that I mentioned. Let us vote. let us vote for FRA.org and nolabels.org.
Let us vote.
Pardon me?
For FRA,
Let us vote for FRA .org. FRA means Fiscal Responsibility Amendment. Okay.
and no labels. Yeah.
Labels.org. Right. Check out those.
Yeah.
Two. They're very worth.
And what was the second question?
You mentioned Switzerland as an example of the way to do things. Are there other countries that we could use as benchmarks?
Yes. Switzerland, Germany, there are other countries, generally the countries that have focused on trying to put their finances in order in a way that provide for long-term growth and sustainability, focus on debt to GDP. Now, as you probably know, the European Union has guidelines of how high deficits are, what, you know, in other words, you shouldn't have deficits more than 3% annual deficit of GDP. You shouldn't have public debt more than 60% of GDP. But if you look at the European Union members, I'm sorry, the Eurozone members, some countries do a good job with that, like Germany. Other countries don't. You know, Italy, you know, Greece, etc.
It's all gone by the wayside. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think the thing about
key is debt to GDP. That's the key. And you can get bipartisan support for that. And here's why. The reason you can get bipartisan support is it's pro-growth, because if you grow the denominator faster than the numerator, you're making progress even if the numerator is increasing. And secondly, it says you got to do something about the numerator because we're on an unsustainable path, but it doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't tell you how much of it is through discretionary spending, how much of it is through social insurance reform, and how much of it is through additional revenues. But you're going to have a mechanism to set the table for them to make those tough choices. The idea that they're going to deal with this on a piecemeal basis on the kind of tough choices that have to be made is totally unrealistic. Not going to happen.
Dino, did you have a question?
Yes. What's your take on immigration, David?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned immigration
Yeah.
reform. What are your thoughts?
Well,
More
several things.
PhDs?
Well, several things. First, if we're going to get any legislation on this, you're going to have to couple border security with immigration reform. Okay, you need to secure the border. Okay, with regard to immigration, I think that we need to learn from other countries. You know, we're in a global economic Olympics. Our immigration policy needs to be focused much more on the kinds of skills and knowledge that we need in order to be able to effectively compete in the world and to grow domestically. That's not what it's focused on now. We need to separate, you know, we need more, you know, temporary work permits, especially with regard to industries that are seasonal. Okay, we need to deal with the dreamers who didn't break the law. Their parents broke the law, but they didn't. Okay, we need to separate a path for citizenship from a path from legal status. Okay, because if you're a citizen, you can vote, and that's what, you know, the progressives want. They want everybody to get amnesty, and everybody's a citizen, and everybody can vote, even if they broke the law or whatever. We need to separate those two things. Okay, I mean, those are just a few thoughts. I mean, but. The other thing we need to think about is, do we want to change the provision? This would take a constitutional amendment. Right now, if you're born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. And the way that our current immigration policy is, that means that you can get your parents to become a citizen. You can end up packing larger family members. You know, some people have talked about the possibility of saying that if you're born in the U.S., you're a citizen if one of your parents is a citizen.
Right. So birthright citizenship, not a fan. Got it. And so any other, did you have one more question?
Just maybe to end on a positive note, I wonder how you would grade what Eric Schmidt refers to innovation power with respect to the United States, because it seems that whether it's the steam engine or the search engine, predominantly it's been invented on our shores. And I think many of us, perhaps as Pete mentioned, would feel that that is not only sustainable, but can accelerate. So maybe just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, there's no question in my mind that I think that we have been the leader in innovation. There's no question. I mean, but I do think that But I do think we have to maintain that, and that means we have to look at regulatory policy, we have to look at tax policy, we have to look at how much are we investing versus consumption, if you will. I think that we also have to look at protecting our intellectual property better than we are, in particular with regard to China. So yeah, I think we're a leader there. I think we could be doing a lot better if we did some of the things I mentioned.
That's
Yeah,
very helpful.
Just on that, so Congress did a study years ago, said the intellectual property innovation value, take it for what it's worth, was $5 trillion. So the idea is to somehow tap into that. It's American companies, not all public. It's somehow tap into that as an asset that can be monetized to a certain extent for the benefit of the country, rather than just pure taxation.
And that's part of the issue that we talked about with regard to DARPA, right? From an
Right.
intellectual standpoint.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah. So I've got one final comment and commentary. Maybe you can reply to it. So I lived in Switzerland for a while. They have the canton system, big fan. And I've spent a lot of time in Austria, which also has fantastic controls over spending, right? I'm sure Austria is probably one of those countries that you throw into your examples of well-run, managed countries, correct?
Yes.
Right.
But
having lived in Germanic parts of Europe, they're very draconian in the way they approach things and people. I'm a big fan of draconian measures. I'm a big fan of Andrew Jackson. So why can't we just take the Andrew Jackson way out of this, ramp up all of our, trade taxes on people, get embargoes, charge huge tariffs on Chinese goods and European goods. Why can't we do that? Why can't we solve deficit spending by the United States government owns 25% of all the land. The federal government owns all the land in the United States, right? The federal deficit when Andrew Jackson was president was $1 billion. He sold off $1 billion of real estate, zero deficit. So why can't we do that?
More than that, the only time in the history of the United States that we've been debt-free was Andrew Jackson.
And he shut down Citibank.
It was debt-free. We had no debt. That will never happen.
Yeah, Citibank has been bailed out every 10 years for 200 years, right? So, I mean, if you shut down Citibank, you solve half the problems, right? But seriously, I mean, everybody in California says, well, you can't find housing because land is so expensive, but they don't tell you that the federal government and the state government in California owns 52% of the land in California, right? So it's kind of fake. So I'm just saying, why can't you take simple measures like engineers would? And so there's an Indian billionaire, and he said, and he's an engineer. He said, great societies are engineered. Politics doesn't solve anything, or different ways, new ways of thinking. No, you have to engineer subways, better highways, better buildings. I mean, your thoughts?
Well, there's no question that we need to, as I said, do more investment and also capitalize on the assets that we have, right? We have significant assets. By the way, if you look at the financial statements of the U.S. government, you're going to be surprised by two things. One, that 20% plus of the land that we own in the United States, there's no value associated with it. Nothing. Okay. The second thing that you're going to be surprised by, and again, you know the old story, if you don't measure it, you don't manage it, right? So the second thing you'll be surprised by is, you know what the largest asset of the federal government is on the balance sheet?
Airwaves? I don't know.
That's what I was thinking.
Student loans. $1.7 trillion. And we should be getting a decision from the Supreme Court this week. I hope they don't have a stand problem, because it's absolutely no question in my mind that what the president's proposing on student loans is fiscally irresponsible, inequitable, and unconstitutional. And in fact, he's proposing to give away hundreds of billions of dollars of federal assets, which is effectively backdoor spending, and only the Congress has the right to decide what we spend money on, not the president.
Sure. So David, just a final point. I just want to get to what you were talking about like the government, I think, is terrible at business, right? So like the selling of the cellular and other network waves, et cetera. They sold them for too cheap. The value is dramatic. And, you know, like if you look at the terrestrial TV stations, things like that, ABC, CBS, et cetera, they sold them for nothing, right? When their value has been, you know, tremendous, right? So government's terrible business, but maybe what the government needs to do is set up a pseudo sovereign wealth fund that encapsulates all this investing it's doing and operates like every other sovereign wealth fund, which reaps the benefits of it. I don't know, but it sounds like something that you could do and make progress on.
I'll give it some thought. The other thing is that I think to the extent that we look at taking more equity approaches, you know, I think that makes some sense, because that way, if there, you know, you got a lot better opportunity for upside, you know, if it works.
Yeah, there's a question about Ray Dalio. I'm not going to ask it because he's a China apologist. So, but you're welcome to answer it online. So thanks so much. Great. We want to have you back as the election approaches. I would definitely want to have you every couple of months. We're going to be in Miami. I'd love to have you come out and speak with like Tim Draper. We'll have John Molina out there, a couple other guys, and you know, those guys tend to be more libertarian oriented.
Yeah.
I don't think libertarianism works, but you know, love to have you come out and to Miami around the time of Art Basel in December and come and speak. So, but I want to have you back several times. So before
let me close with this. Let me close with this.
Yes,
We're a great country, but we have some significant challenges. And as I said at the beginning, we will remain a superpower if we take some of the steps that I've talked about. But in order to make those changes, you got to wake people up. You have to have a call to action, and you have to have a way forward. That's what I try to do. We need more people focused on that. And if we do, our future will be better than our past. Thank you.
fantastic. Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Great job.